Welcome back to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Zaran. Thank you, as always, for joining me for another edition of the show. The world of college football is ever changing, ever chaotic, and ever insane, for lack of a better term. And with the playoff about to start, they decided, you know what, let's make it even more insane. And that's when Michigan fired head coach Sherrone Moore, which is an ongoing situation involving the law and just a lot of tentacles to it. And I wanted to talk about that today from a number of different aspects. And to help me do that is my friend and previous guest of the show, Brandon Leopold. Brandon, how are you doing today?
Good, Omar. Good. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, whenever it's just kind of inside baseball for everybody, whenever I'm kind of looking for a guest about a topic, a lot of times I'll put a feeler out there. Normally, I do that like on Blue Sky or Threads, but I thought with the Michigan thing, I'm like, I have a lot of friends back in Michigan on my Facebook account. I'm like, let me just throw one out there, see if anyone wants to talk about it. And Brandon volunteered himself, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing,
We'll
to
find
talk.
out, won't we?
Yeah, yeah, we will. So, Brandon, obviously, you live in the state of Michigan, you're a Michigan fan, and
Yeah.
so when I saw from the outside looking in, I was like, "Oh shit!" This is that's kind of crazy because he just went 9-3. Yeah, he lost to Ohio State, but like on the surface, before all the other stuff came out, you were just kind of like interesting, right? And
Mhm.
so for you as a fan, as somebody who's local, what was your initial reaction when the headline came across that Michigan had moved on from Sherrone Moore?
You basically said it. It was basically, oh shit. Because you know, speaking for myself, I mean, I never went to the school, so I'm kind of what they call a Walmart Wolverine. So I was like, oh, all right. So I was kind of shocked that they did, and then once we found out, I thought at first, like a lot of people did, that it was because his first year they went 8-4, second year they went 9-3. Yeah, 1-1 to Ohio State, but the offense was stagnant. They really didn't see a lot of development in Bryce Underwood. So I thought it was performance based. But then once this kind of unraveled, it went from oh my God to oh my God, like that kind of thing. And then once the shock subsided, it kind of turned into disappointment, sadness. Um, my heart obviously goes out to the family of Sherrone Moore and to everybody else who was affected by this. All the players that they brought in, they just brought in the number 11 recruiting class too. And usually when something like this happens, you see a mass influx, or excuse me, a mass exodus of recruits. And so far, the good thing that Michigan has going for them is that all but two so far have declared their intent to stay at Michigan. So that's good news there. But, again, just it's one of those where you never think it can happen until it does.
Yeah, to kind of clear, we kind of danced around what happened here, and obviously, I don't want to talk about it too much because it's still an ongoing legal investigation.
Right.
But so he gets fired for cause. Come to find out, he was having an affair. I'm sure Moore is married with 3 children. He comes to find out he is having an affair with a staffer. The staffer is getting paid a bunch of extra salary, and kind of gets found out by like a DoorDash situation. It's like the thing has so many tentacles, and
Mhm.
course, he kind of, when the walls start crashing in on him, just does some heinous stuff and just start threatening people, threatening his own life, and so obviously that's very disturbing. And so the human element aspect, I guess we could talk about that real quick, and we won't have to revisit it throughout here. But for the human element aspect, like, what's your read on the whole thing in in the way that he acted, in the way that the response has been to the way that he acted?
So the report came out that he was dealing with a lot of mental health issues.
Hmm.
And granted, that doesn't give you the right to go to your, mistress's house and put a knife to her throat, allegedly.
Right.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know what, there's conflicting reports out there, but really it was more along the lines of, he went to jail. He went to, his court hearing. Everything seemed, appropriate. Do I think he should have had maybe a harsher sentence? I don't know, because you have that mental health stature there. I mean, it's so hard to prove without any kind of documentation, but obviously something in him snapped, and maybe it was him being fired, maybe it was allegedly, again, all I'm going off of is what I've read, what I've heard, what I've seen, that allegedly the girlfriend or the staffer broke up with him on Monday, but he gave the press conference before the bowl game, and you could tell that didn't look like anything was wrong. So again, you just never know.
Right.
And really that's really all I can speak to about that. But again, I mean, like I said, we know what allegedly happened. It was allegedly the staffer came to the university and said, hey, this is what's going on after the alleged assault took place. And that's all we know so far.
So let's pivot into the institution itself and their role here. So how much blame do you cast upon them? Because again, we talked about a bunch of conflicting reports on this, but a lot of people suggesting that they already knew about this, and some tinfoil hat people have gone a step further and said, well, they just were waiting for a reason to be able to fire this guy because they wanted to move on from him anyway. So what kind of responsibility and culpability do you think the institution of Michigan football or the University of Michigan and Warde Manuel, the AD, have to do with this whole situation?
So really where I would put the majority of the blame is on Warde Manuel and the athletics department as a whole.
Mhm.
And the reason being is because this is not the first scandal under his watch. We were just coming off of the whole Connor Stallions sign stealing thing. Before that, we had, the Burger Gate, the whole thing with, Jim Harbaugh and the recruiting violations with the cheeseburger. It just kind of seemed like anytime there was some kind of, and then even going back further, there was, I think it was a football player that took Warde Manuel's wife's car for a drive and crashed the car. So, all these things that just kind of get swept under the rug, he didn't really do a good enough job of, instituting the kind of discipline that needed to be instituted. Mozzie Smith, who was now a defensive tackle for the Dallas Cowboys, there was a whole thing where there was a gun charge involved with him, and he was still allowed to play in the bowl game or in a upcoming game. I don't know if it was a bowl game or whatever, but he was still allowed to play. The whole thing with Jim Harbaugh. Well, if you knew that this stuff, and the whole thing with Sherrone Moore, if you knew that this stuff was going on, you gotta do something. And there was no way that he couldn't have known, right? If when you're an athletics director, you have so many different staff people, you have so many different, people in your office, somebody somewhere had to have known, right? Now, if they were paid money to not say anything, who knows? But Warde had to do a better job of institutional control, if anything, to repair the optics from the Connor Stallion scandal, right? And now this is just another one on his watch. The university as a whole, I mean, I'm one of those fans that could separate the education school from the athletic school. Right. So, I mean, the fact that right now he still has a job, I mean, we have to realize too that Michigan also has an interim president. So I didn't really expect him to get fired right away. I do expect, and again, this is just me, pontificating. This isn't me, with any credible evidence or anything, but I do expect that after they pick the next coach, that Warde Manuel may be on his way out. They did say a couple of days ago that they are bringing in a firm to investigate further as to how much Warde Manuel knew, did he cover anything up, etc. So, but really that's where most of the blame should go. The tinfoil hats that say, well, they were just looking for it. I mean, You can make an argument. I mean, like I said, you have Bryce Underwood, who was the number one quarterback in the country, and you barely used him the way he could be used. The offense was stale. There was reports coming out that him and offensive coordinator Chip Lindsey didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things. Chip Lindsey wanted to run the offense one way, and he wanted to run it another way. But the bottom line is he went 1-1 against Ohio State. He beat Michigan State twice. You went from 8-4 to 9-3, and you beat Alabama in a bowl game twice. Or I'm sorry, you beat Alabama twice. You beat him once in the bowl game the year before, and then once the following year. So, you beat Alabama twice. So the fact that they were looking for an excuse to get rid of him, I don't really buy that. But then again, I'm not on campus, so I don't know.
Speaking of they must have known something thing. Sherrone Moore isn't exactly covering his tracks here.
Exactly.
So that's kind of like I've always felt like if there's some dirt or some muck on a big time college football program, the people at the higher levels tend to know about it. So
exactly. And it's not like this is, and not to pick on James Madison, but it's not like this is James Madison or Old Dominion.
Right.
This is a major Power 5 school. Like if this happened at like Alabama, right, or Georgia, they would know about it like that, in an instant. I mean, this is Michigan. This is power. This is prestige. This is a brand. There was no way nobody could
have. So you talked about Ohio State and him going 1-on-1 against the Buckeyes, and let's hypothetically speaking, let's say they win that game this year, right? So then they become 10-2. They beat one of the best teams in the country. Is he still having his job? Do they kind of say winning is the best cologne, right?
Sure.
So if you're 10-2, you're probably on the doorstep of the playoff, if not in the playoff directly, and you have beaten your rival 2 years in a row. Is it fair to reason that had he won that game, he might still have a job, and they might be trying to cover this up?
Fair to reason? I'm not sure. Fair to speculate? Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you said, winning cures all. So we would definitely be having a different conversation, right. But that's not to say that this wouldn't come out still. I think they would wait until after the playoff to go public with it.
Right.
But that's not to say that it wouldn't have come out to begin with. But I think, again, because winning does cure everything, and it is, if they had beaten Ohio State, then I think we would be having a different conversation.
You mentioned this earlier about separating Michigan, the football team or the athletics program, from Michigan, the academic institution. And, I think Michigan and other schools like Notre Dame does this as well, where they kind of have this above the fray image, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're Michigan, we're Notre Dame, we're not like the rest of you in the SEC or the rest
holier
of the
than thou, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of holier than thou stuff, and that part of that is the history. You've been playing football for over 100 years, and and it's just kind of like that's the way they view themselves. But you mentioned this happening, the Connor Stallion stuff. I mean, there were violations during the Rich Rod era. This isn't a clean program by any stretch of the imagination. Does this happening in this moment taint the image that they have of themselves a little bit, where you're like, listen, Michigan, you're just like Georgia and Auburn and Alabama. You're gonna get in the muck just like them, because that's table stakes in big time college football.
Is the Pope Catholic? I mean, yeah, I mean, of course it does. I mean, in their fight song, it says the leaders and best. And at least for the past, 5-6 years, they haven't been the leaders and they haven't been the best. So, I mean, yeah, it absolutely does taint the image, because it's one after another, after another, after another. If there was, the one scandal, and then there was, maybe a decade, maybe 15 years later, and then something maybe on a smaller scale, I might view it a little differently. But because of the fact that there were two major scandals back to back, and well, actually technically three, that they just turned such a blind eye to, it absolutely taints it. I mean, it's just like you said, and now it drags them down from, this is Michigan, the Harvard of the Midwest, to we're just like Georgia, we're just like Alabama, we're just like, insert school here. Academics wise, I mean, it's still one of the premier institutions in the country, but athletics wise, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that name's going to be dragged through the mud. I mean, even now with the ongoing coaching search, I mean, who's going to want to take this job right now? With everything so up in the air and the waters being so muddied. I mean, we'll see how that plays out later on, but yeah, I mean, absolutely, it taints the image, sure.
I mean, to that point, is there even such a thing as a quote unquote clean football program anymore, specifically in the Power Four, right? Like, does it even exist?
No, I don't think so. I mean, maybe in the lower tier Power Four schools, like maybe like a UCLA or Purdue, that don't really have a lot of NIL or anything like that. A lot of Michigan, Purdue, right? I mean, right. Again, great institution, but not necessarily the greatest of athletic programs. I think really we see it more in the Power Four programs than the Group of Fives, but I really don't think so. I think it's all being eroded, in some way, in some form or another. It's only a matter of time before we find out who's next.
I mean, from that point, as a general viewing public, do we even care? Like the products on the field, like it's easy to sell the story like, hey, look, NIL allowed Indiana to be the number 1 ranked team in the country. Or, it allowed Vanderbilt to become relevant again, and that's an easier story to digest for us than, hey, everybody's in on the take here and everybody's crooked.
Well, think about this. Why do we watch sports? We watch sports to be entertained, right? I mean,
100%, yeah.
And so, people outside of Michigan care about what's going on with Michigan because number one, it's right now, and number two, because it's Michigan, right? Yeah. If James Madison beats Oregon in the first round of the playoff, people will care, but in a couple of days it'll die out. This, because of the fact that there is the brand associated with it, and it is right now, that's why people outside of the state of Michigan would care.
Yep.
Normally, though, if Sherrone Moore hadn't been fired, people in Virginia probably wouldn't care what's going on at Michigan. They wouldn't. They went 9-3. Okay, well, on NCAA 26, how am I going to do in my, dynasty, right? I came to watch, Virginia beat, whoever in whatever bowl game, that kind of thing. Right. Or they don't care because they're disillusioned with college football, with the state of the sport, with the way it's going. So there's two sides to that coin too. So
yeah. Let's double back on their coaching search here. So they because of the timing of this, they kind of missed the carousel, right? All the Group 5 guys who were going to get hired at new jobs have already been hired at new jobs. Namely, the guy from James Madison is going to UCLA. The guy from Tulane is going to Florida, John Summerall. So, and you kind of start to wonder, who are they going to go after? There's people talking about Kalen DeBoer if Alabama gets bounced in the first round of the playoff. People talk about Jed Fish from Washington, which is interesting because, they're kind of building something a little bit there. But, how do you turn down a brand like Michigan? It's tough. It's the same reason why DeBoer left Washington for Alabama, after
exactly. It's Alabama. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, from your perspective, and maybe there's NFL guys. Some people talk about Brian Daboll, who just got fired from the Giants. Who would you kind of look at as this is a strong candidate? Obviously, you mentioned it's kind of a difficult hire right now because of everything going on off the field.
Yeah. So, as a strong candidate, it's really down to 3 people. It's Kalen DeBoer, as you mentioned. It's, oh my goodness, I just lost his name. Oh, Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State is another name that's being, thrown around. And then Jed Fish over at Washington. Now, the reason for DeBoer, number one, is he began his coaching career at Eastern Michigan. Okay, so he has some ties here. I think his wife is from here. So he has some ties here. And it's like you said, Alabama, they don't play nice over there. Their fans. If they lose in the first round of the playoff again, he could be on the hot seat. In terms of it being Alabama versus Michigan, I mean, it's really kind of a draw. In terms of prestige, in terms of NIL money, in terms of whatever. Kalen DeBoer is going to be a little harder, I think, to lure away because Arizona State is his alma mater, number one. And number two, he turned Arizona State around in 2 years, right? They were not good, the past couple seasons before he got there. And then Jedd Fisch, the reason why people like Jedd Fisch is because, number one, like you said, he is building, something at Washington. He just came with the number 12 ranked recruiting class in the nation. So he's an elite recruiter. The thing with Fisch is he was on Jim Harbaugh's staff. And I don't know if the fans will want anything to associate with Harbaugh at this point, given everything that's gone on. I think maybe in a few years from now, maybe, but Fisch is more of the bronze medal. Actually, you know what? Fisch is more like the participation trophy as opposed to the bronze medal. I think the bronze medal would be someone like, God, I don't know. Maybe like a Chris Creighton over at Eastern, somebody like that. But you want someone in this cycle that's, number one, got integrity, which I know is so hard to come by these days. Number two, can be I don't want to say a calming influence, but can be a uniter, right? Can someone that can unite the program, that can keep the ship afloat if something happens. And then somebody with recruiting skills. I would prefer someone with at least Big Ten knowledge, not necessarily you have to be a Michigan man, but at least have some idea of the Midwest when it comes to recruiting, be able to recruit the elites out of Ohio, out of Florida, out of Texas, and somebody who can build a program and build a culture. And I think really between the three names I mentioned, I think it's really DeBoer and Dillingham 1 and 2 that can do that. In terms of the NFL names, I mean, Tommy Rees was bandied about, the offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns. Gross. Sure, do your due diligence, but I would steer clear from that. Brian Daboll, it's a name, right? It'll put butts in seats. I don't think he's made for the college game. A lot of people were throwing John Gruden's name around. A lot of people were throwing around Jesse Minter, too, the defensive coordinator currently for the Chargers, who went with Harbaugh. The problem with Jesse Minter is that he has a show cause that, takes him to where if he was to be hired at any school, the school has to explain why they're hiring him, basically. So, Jesse Minter would be an interesting choice, but ultimately, like I said, I think it'll come to the three between Fisch, DeBoer, and Dillingham.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, like, a friend of mine who's also a UM fan, he was like, "Oh, we need to throw a bag at Dan Lanning." And I was just like, why on earth would Dan Lanning leave Oregon?
Right.
It makes 0 sense because unlimited NIL.
Exactly. Unlimited NIL. Nike's got more money than you and I will ever see in 6 lifetimes.
Right.
So there ain't no way that's going to happen. But I don't know. If he doesn't start winning championships, he might be on the hot seat at Oregon. But we'll see. But it's like you said to open the show. It's ever fluid. It's ever changing. So, one name that I would throw out there too that isn't getting a lot of hype is Kalani Sitake over at BYU. If you want kind of an under the radar name, turn BYU into a powerhouse. Granted, they are in the Big 12, which is one of the weaker of the Power Fives, but it's still a job of turning around a program that went 8-4 to back-to-back, 1-loss, 2-loss teams. So, and again, another elite recruiter, somebody who's coming in from outside, doesn't have any ties with Harbaugh, doesn't have any ties with Sherrone Moore, that kind of thing. So, there's another interesting name that could potentially, unfold. We'll just have to wait and see what happens.
So let's get back to Moore for a second here. Let's play a game of assuming that he is eventually cleared of these charges. Okay.
Mhm.
And, there's this feeling, and I think there's a similar feeling about Mel Tucker when he was fired at MSU, where these guys aren't going to get jobs again. And do you think that's the case, or is there a scenario in 5 years we see Sherrone Moore at Jacksonville State or something like that?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because I was actually just thinking about that today as I was getting ready for this. I think it's going to be a long time before he gets another job,
Mhm.
but I think if he had gone the way of Bobby Petrino, if you remember his whole thing where he had his little stunt and then kind of disappeared for a while, and then Arkansas hired him. Maybe it had to have been 5 years later, I think. But he just kind of went away, right? He was out of the spotlight. You didn't hear from him. If Sherrone Moore hadn't done what he did and just got fired and just disappeared, I think somebody might have taken a chance on it based on his recruiting. Now, that's not to say that, somebody won't bring him on as like a position coach, right? Like an offensive line coach or as a, with the condition, like you said, he's cleared, he's done his time, he's rehabilitated his image, he's cooperated with the law. His name has stayed out of the headlines. He stayed out of people's DMs, but that's another story altogether. I think we could potentially see a natural progression, like you mentioned, like a Jacksonville State, maybe not as head coach, maybe as like a offensive line coach, working his way back up, and then finally seeing another coaching job. I'm a big believer in second chances. So and again, you have to have the criteria met, but ultimately, if we do see it, it won't be for a while. Like maybe 5-10 years down the road,
Right.
but and then we don't know. He may not want to coach again.
Right.
This may have been because of the fact that, at a school like Michigan, 2 years not winning a national title, you lose to Ohio State 2 years in a row, and you don't cheat your way into a national championship, you're gone. Like, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, short answer, I don't know. Longer winded answer, I think he could.
Yeah.
I think he could. I think Mel Tucker could as well.
Yeah, you kind of want to, with that sort of thing, once you're all cleared and everything, and you've done everything in the due process of the law, you kind of just you get a job like you said, as a position coach, either there or even in the NFL, and just kind of fade off into the background for a little while, you know.
Right.
And that's, I mean, in a way, like that's kind of what Lane Kiffin did for a little bit, right?
Yep.
And he kind of did the coordinator thing for a little bit with Saban, and eventually, who when he was, when it was palatable to let him come back, he came back, and
Exactly.
that's a big thing. Um, we kind of talked about all these accusations and stuff, and a lot of this boils down, I think, to think about the position that Jerome Moore was in from a power perspective.
Mhm.
I'm the guy because really, you could argue that NFL coaching staff is almost like a democracy in a way. There's so many moving parts, and a lot of different people have voices. In college, it's for a long time, it's been a lot more like a monarchy. The head of the snake is the coach, and everything starts there. And
Yeah.
when you're at a program like a Michigan, that is so visible and is, you would argue, a top 10 name recognition brand in college sports, then you have this inflated sense of importance and power. Like, I'm the head coach of Michigan. Like, he would tag that in anything, any communication he had. Sherrone Moore, University of Michigan head football coach. It's kind of
Exactly.
like, So he felt that, I think. And so with the power dynamics here, and he is not the first, nor will he be the last to do inappropriate conduct from the position of a head football coach in a power conference and a power program. So, is this just these type of situations? Are they just symptoms of the disease that is big time college football?
I think so.
Hmm,
I mean, it's like you said, it's never going to be completely eradicated.
right.
Um, but there's a way to maybe reduce it
Hmm,
in a way. I think if you, like you said, I think Sherrone Moore was given free reign,
hmm,
to do kind of what he wanted to do. Whereas, and as an athletics director, obviously, you don't want to meddle too much,
hmm,
but power unchecked gets abused very easily.
right.
So I think if there's a way to institute any kind of like checks and balances within a college football program like a Michigan, like an Alabama, like a Georgia, I think it would be a little better. But again, I think it is just kind of and I know I'm probably going to get thrown to the wolves for saying this, but I think it is honestly a symptom of the disease, like you said. And it's sad. It shouldn't be, but it is because we see this all the time, even in life. We see this all the time from people in positions of power, and a lot of times unchecked power. So, um, so yeah. To answer your question, I think it is. Yeah.
And to be clear, for everybody listening, college football is not some isolated case where powerful men abuse their power to further
Right.
their ambitions, whatever they may be, whether that's financially or sexually or whatever the case, And yeah, so which is funny because to me, it's funny because in college football, it's like the whole pitch is like, I'm a family man. I'm
Right.
going to be a
Exactly.
father figure to your 18-year-old kid who's going to come and play wide receiver for me, and it's more often than not the well of power is so tainted, that it's virtually impossible for anyone to remain clean. And that doesn't absolve Sherrone Moore, of course. He's still at fault for decisions he made as an adult,
Exactly.
as a free thinking adult. But there is something to be said, I think, about the institution and the way that power is so corruptible in these type of positions. And because you think about the whole state of Michigan for the most part, and it's not as bad in Michigan because you do have MSU fans, but
Right.
think about in Georgia, the primary big university there is UGA. Yeah, you have like Georgia Southern and stuff, but they're not on that same level. And so when you have all of those eyeballs on you and these people who kind of worship you, like think about how they feel about Kirby Smart in Georgia. They love this guy, right? Yeah. For good
Exactly.
reason. He's an awesome coach, but that can get to your head real quickly, and that could have really negative effects for the people in your direct circle. I kind of want to close this episode, Brandon, kind of talking a little philosophical from a fan perspective. So I'll start this with a story, and it'll lead to my question. So when I moved to Michigan in 2005, now important to know about me as somebody who grew up in New York City, I never really had a college football team,
Mhm.
because who am I going to root for? Syracuse,
Right.
like yeah, it's just like it's upstate New York, might as well be another country. I'm sure as hell not going to
Exactly.
root for Rutgers in New Jersey, So there is no in city university like there is in basketball with St. John's.
Oh yeah,
So
Buffalo.
they got Buffalo again, upstate. You talk to a New
Right.
Yorker, it might as well be another country,
Right.
And so for me, it was always so interesting to see this passion that both Michigan and Michigan State fans had for their schools, even the MAC schools, Western, Eastern, and Central, had these really dedicated and loyal fan bases. I always found it so fascinating, and I would talk to Michigan fans, and they would, the older fans, and they would kind of tell me about the glory years and Desmond Howard and all that. When I got there, that's when like it was like towards the tail end of the Lloyd Carr era with Chad Henne and Hart
Yeah.
and Manningham and all those guys. And like I remember I knew a guy who was for one semester at Michigan. It was roommates with Steve Breston,
Oh, okay.
who went out and played in the NFL for a little bit,
Yeah.
and he would just kind of like, yeah, me and Steve are tight, man. It was like 5 years after this dude left school. Like you were with him there for one semester. I'm sure he remembers you, buddy. But it's just kind of like there's this attachment and this emotional resonance. I think in a way that pro teams don't have as much with a lot of people. Like, yeah, people root for the Lions and stuff, but I still feel like there was a bigger emotional attachment for a lot of people to Michigan. Now that could be years of winning versus many years of not winning for the Lions, but that's
Don't
be
remind
that
me.
as yeah, be that as it may, right? That's just the case, right?
Right.
So for your perspective, you're kind of looking at this and looking at the other scandals. We kind of talked about the separation of the institution and the program. Do you kind of look at your fandom for Michigan a little bit differently now? Is just kind of does it feel like tainted? Does it feel dirty? Does it feel weird? Is it not what it used to be? Like where are you at with that?
So it's really not where it used to be for sure. And the scandals do have something to do with that. But the other thing too is I graduated from Central Michigan. So my passion lies with CMU.
Mhm.
So when I look at something that happens with Michigan, I read up on it, I look at it. The reason I'm a Michigan fan is because that was the first college football game I ever saw, was Michigan, Colorado, 1997. So, and then I was just hooked ever since.
Mhm.
So I was kind of, indirectly indoctrinated into Michigan. But do I feel dirty about it? No, because it's football. I
Okay.
mean, because eventually somebody's going to come in, somebody's going to clean it up, somebody's gonna right the ship, and off we go.
Mhm.
College football's not ending, right? Just because it's a scandal here, a scandal there. Again, it's like you said, with a school like Michigan, like Alabama, like Georgia, like Florida, you've got so many eyeballs on you. It's so
Right.
hard to stay, hidden under the radar here. So it's gonna happen, So going into it with that mindset doesn't really taint my fandom per se. Does it make me feel a little weird? Yeah. Does it, seem like it's not the same? Yeah, a little. But again, I'll still watch on Saturdays because number one, I'm a fan of football. And number two, because they're on TV.
Right.
So, and if it's a good matchup, I'm going to watch it. If, I have other plans, then so be it. But, that's what it is. Now I can't speak for other people in the state and people that I know that are Michigan fans, but I know me personally, like I said, it'll feel weird, but I don't necessarily feel dirty about
You brought up the CMU ties, and it reminded me. So I wrote a piece recently about the way that the general public and maybe even like the college football media at large has treated the inclusion of James Madison and Tulane into the playoff.
it. Yeah.
And it's felt really gross to me
Mhm.
because, like the rules are the rules, right? And they got in anyway. And I find myself as the time goes by, objectively knowing that the quality in the SEC and the Big Ten, especially, and the Big 12 and ACC to a lesser extent, is superior. The athletes are better, the coaches are better, the on-field product is higher level, closer to NFL caliber than other schools. But if you throw a MAC game or a Sun Belt game or a Conference USA game on a Wednesday night, I'm watching,
Yeah, for sure.
because there's something. It feels almost more like harkening to the past of it, where they're just just student athletes, whatever, and yeah, those schools do pay players too.
Mhm.
Let's not act like they don't, but
Right.
it feels almost more organic in a weird way. There's a weird word to use, but that's the way I feel about it. Where a lot of times I watch an SEC game, even like bad SEC teams, like you watch like Mississippi State and Kentucky, and it just feels like NFL light, or they're trying to be NFL light.
Right.
And yeah, so I find myself gravitating towards that, and I find myself like caring more about the G6 schools. Like one of the things I'm most excited about next year is the new Pac-12
Hmm.
because it's kind of like a little become more regional again. Like, yeah, they threw a school from Texas in there, but it's mostly West Coast schools,
Right.
and yeah, I find myself super interested in it. That's why I love the MAC. It's very Midwest. You have
Yes.
like, three Michigan schools, like four or five Ohio schools, and it's just like it's very concentrated into that one area. And then when you throw in like a Ball State and Indiana, might as well be they're all in the same cluster. That's fun, right?
Hmm.
And so I find myself when I'm reminded of this with these
Yeah.
scandals. It's like yeah, sure I know that I'm gonna see a lot of these guys playing at Ohio State on Sundays, and maybe I'll watch them more then. But for some reason, I just find myself kind of gravitating to these smaller schools as a result.
Well, and speaking for myself, I mean, I'm a little biased, obviously, but
Right.
MAC football is an exciting brand of football.
It's
You know,
fun, yeah. It's
you
very fun.
you can, Central Michigan at one point, at any point, could run circles around Michigan State. Like because of the fact that maybe Michigan State makes a mistake, right, and Central Michigan capitalizes on it. Anybody anywhere can beat anybody at any time.
Right.
And you mentioned that James Madison and Tulane kind of felt gross to you being in the playoff, but
The
harken back.
response to them being in the playoff was gross. I think they belong in the
Oh,
playoff.
got it.
I
Yeah.
don't think
So
they should be excluded. It's just that people
right.
are just saying they don't belong. We should have got Notre Dame in. They should have broken the rules. That to me felt gross.
Yeah, and I have my own opinion on Notre Dame, but I'll get to that another time. But even back to the BCS days when you had Boise State and Oklahoma, right? And you had Northern Illinois, Florida State. I mean, which is really kind of what started all this. But Boise State beat Oklahoma, right? So every so often you'll get that major Appalachian State, Michigan, right? Toledo, Michigan, a few years ago under the Rich Rod era. Every once in a while you'll get that smaller school. Just imagine the chaos it would cause if James Madison upsets Oregon, right?
Mhm.
Or if Tulane beats Ole Miss. Like Tulane is fun to watch. Like they are an exciting brand of football. And again, too, also thank the ACC for this because of their crazy tiebreaker with, Virginia and Duke somehow getting into the championship game with 5 losses and then ultimately beating Virginia. So, people wanted chaos and chaos is what we get. So,
For sure.
but you mentioned in terms of the smaller schools, I mean, Southern Mississippi,
Mhm.
what a turnaround they were. They were 2-10 last year, 9-3 this year. They're in a bowl game, So it's like when it starts like that, like SMU wins 2 in a row, 3 in a row. 4, okay, well, I'm going to watch one of these games. I'm going to see what's different. I turned my eyes to the Holy War because I never watched BYU Utah in my life, but because I could care less. But
Right.
4 o'clock in the afternoon, I was on my couch. I was watching BYU in Utah. Maybe I was desperate for football. I don't know, but it was, the people that don't tune into like the Tuesday night Maction, for example, or the Wednesday night Maction, there's a reason they call it Maction, right? You're missing out. It is exciting, especially for the chance that there might be that one chance of a major upset, a team like Eastern Michigan or Central Michigan going unbeaten, finding themselves in the playoff, and off we go. So, yeah.
Yeah, we'll close on this. It's like a lot of people, again, they kind of belittle the G5 and soon to be G6.
Right.
Once the Pac-12 is back fully integrated, uh, but the American Conference, I feel like it's a bad rap because I would argue this year, when you factor in that they had Tulane, North Texas, which is a pretty good team, USF, Memphis. These are decently run programs. I would argue like they felt better top to bottom than what we got in the ACC.
I actually
You
have a
know,
funny story about Memphis, but continue.
Good. No, good.
No,
Yeah.
no. So Memphis, I heard actually petitioned to be in the Big 12.
They did.
And and you may have heard the story, but I don't know how many of your followers did. But they said, yeah, we'll get you FedEx. We'll get you. If we don't win X number of games for 5 years, you can kick us out of the conference. We got however many millions of dollars. And the Big 12 said, click. So
I never understood that. Because again, Memphis is a consistent 8, 9, 10 win program, over these last few years. They have a decent program. They've turned out NFL talent. Not like other schools, but they've had some guys in the NFL. So it's like, who are you, Big 12?
Exactly.
Yeah, that never made sense to me. And so but I'm just saying that the respect for the G6, but
exactly. Shout out
to the G6, shout out to the Maction. But Brandon, man, this was awesome as it always is. So thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely.
If you all enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a follow on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Until next time, I'm your host, Omar Zaran. Thank you as always for joining me for another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast.